So let's talk strategic use of cardio for fat loss. And so there's some really interesting data and studies on this. So like we've said a few times, ultimately when it comes to losing weight, losing body fat in particular, you need to be in a calorie deficit, right? Which means you need to consume less calories than you're burning. Now, once again, we've said this before, but there's a lot of other factors, hormonally, lifestyle-wise, that can go into that. But laws of thermodynamics apply. And so when it comes to cardio, there's, uh, really, I can't stress this enough, but you can't just be what's called a cardio bunny, right? Where you just always do cardio, and assume it's always going to work. Your bodies are adaptive. And so what happens is, let's say you start doing cardio for the first time in a long time, and maybe you lose a lot of weight really quickly without too many nutritional lifestyle changes. But eventually, over time, your body will stop losing weight because our bodies are adaptive. We're metabolically adaptive. And so there's also some interesting studies too showing that if you do really heavy cardio in the morning, over time, you actually might move less during the day for your body to kind of, balance out energy-wise. And so anyway, so the way I like to approach cardio and the prescribed cardio is to do it in phases. And so initially, with most of my clients, and the encouragement for you here is to spend the first part of your fat loss journey really just dialing in nutrition and lifestyle adjustments and changes. Once again, if you haven't watched the Welcome to Hypertrophy section, watch that. But you need to dial that in, and you should see some weight loss from a nutritional perspective. But what's going to happen is, hopefully you're kind of hitting that 1 to 2 pounds a week from a fat loss perspective, because everything's dialed in nutritionally, lifestyle-wise, all these things. But then eventually, once again, our bodies are adaptive. And so let's say you're in it for 6, 8, 12 weeks, and then you start to plateau a little bit, which is totally normal. Also because you become a smaller person, so you actually need less calories, and so you have to adjust your macros over time as well. But another thing you can do besides adjusting your macros, because that's happens a lot, is people, you eat less and 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 less, and all of a sudden you're like 1,200 calories a day, and you're like, I can't lose weight. It's like, okay, what else can we do? And so this is a great time to strategically introduce extra cardio. And so maybe at this point you're doing 1 or 2 cardio sessions a week for like no more than 30 minutes at a time. But at this point, this is when you can really crank up the cardio while protecting your resistance training. So resistance training is still the thing you want to focus on from a workout perspective, because that's going to protect your muscle mass. If you just crank up the cardio and neglect resistance training, you will lose muscle mass. And once again, that's metabolically unhealthy. You'll become more unhealthy afterwards. And so, resistance training is dialed in. But maybe, if you were doing lifting like 3 or 4 days a week, if we're cranking up the cardio, not the end of the world to say resistance train maybe 2 days a week, right? So doing an upper lower split, or just alternating between those 2 days to protect the muscle mass while at the same time cranking up the cardio. So how I like to approach cardio is essentially whatever kind of cardio you hate the least, or hopefully like the most, is cool cardio, right? As long as you get your heart rate elevated. Simple formula is to do 220 minus your age, and then divided by, or multiplied by like 0.7. So fancy way of saying 220, if you're 20 years old, it'd be 220 minus 20 would be 200, and then 200 times 0.7 would be like your aerobic zone. So that'd be your heart rate. And then so that's, I don't even know what that number would be. Would that be like 130, 140 beats per minute? And so obviously the older you are, the lower that number gets. And so if you can find some kind of cardio activity that gets you in an elevated heart rate for 30, 40 minutes, right? That could be pickleball, it could be jogging, it could be walking, it could be swimming, it could be an elliptical, it could be a Stairmaster if you really want to torture yourself. Whatever the case may be, you just got to get your heart rate elevated consistently over a 30 to 40 minute window. Doing that 2, 3, 4 days a week. And once again, you're expending more energy, right? You're using cardio to expend more energy. Sometimes you'll hear about this idea of doing fasted versus fed cardio, because technically, if you do fasted cardio, you technically do burn fat initially and primarily. But we have studies on this, and it's basically showing that even though, yes, during fasted cardio you do burn fat, over the course of your day, it doesn't lead to any greater fat loss outcomes than fed cardio. So ultimately, when it comes to cardio, your preference, whether you do it fasted or fed or first thing in the morning or later in the day. But this is the overall kind of message I'm driving at here, is don't just assume you can just do cardio and lose weight perpetually. You will not. Your body will adapt and you will eventually plateau. Start with nutritional disciplines, start with those adjustments on a nutrition perspective, a lifestyle perspective, getting sleep dialed in, all these things, and then strategically using like bursts of cardio. So, okay, I do nutrition and I'm gonna do 4-8 week kind of like really intensive cardio, and then kind of dial that back and only doing like once or twice a week. And then, letting your body adjust once again, and you're strategically introducing and then taking out the high-end cardio as a way to help with the fat burn, fat loss. So don't just assume cardio forever and ever and always is going to be the thing that's going to help you lose a lot of weight. It won't, but it can be used strategically in like sprints, if you will, to help you with that calorie deficit. As always, if you have any questions, let me know.